Hello and welcome to this week's review of comics with Nyobi Outbreak Issues 2. It's going to be a bit of a discussion here. There's a few things going on. Here there's a collection of the different covers that were available. There were quite a few, actually, that were available. I don't have any of those. I just have the regular run-of-the-mill cover in my case. And most of those covers are actually between really good to really great. So I'm quite happy with them. The one that the two that I probably would have wanted are the two at the bottom here. This one from Ben Dunn. Don't know who did this one. Actually, I didn't quite check. It's not a thing that I actually check, but those two are the most appealing to me. The others, they're good as well, to different levels. And they most of them, as you can see, display Nyobi and Catcall. One of the issue I have is that Catcall is actually not quite prevalent in this issue. So that all of those covers are a little bit misleading in a way. Our main character in this book is still Nyobi, which kind of makes sense. She does seem to have a history with most of the other G-Noms we meet in this issue. The first one we meet her is in the jail in the back, Arizona. And they do seem to have an history together, but we're not explained what it is. She does seem to have a pretty good fighting abilities, which are really good. She does seem to be able to throw energy beams as well as her portals. That's the first time I see her do that, so I'm not 100% sure how that is. And she's about the only G-Nom that we meet here that shows that you can be well adjusted and not various levels, not jobs. Even if you look at some of her friends, they don't always look perfectly balanced, let's say, especially in the case of Sybil. We do get more about Keats in this one. We apparently see that she calls herself Vira. And from what we see and what we learn of her in this particular book, well, she's your Bajit Zik bitch Antifa revolutionary and the perfect useful idiot. Honestly, that's her entire personality. She really doesn't realize that those types are the first ones going against the wall whenever things go their way. And she doesn't seem to realize that, like I keep saying here, rioting for justice is the same as fighting for peace. It doesn't quite work. Our story begins with poor Tommy running away from someone in the web alleyways throughout the city of Port Hope. And he decides to blindly shoot at something sideways because that's the way you make sure you miss someone. Probably because he doesn't understand the 5 elements of self-defense, which you can find at lawofselfdefense.com. And poor Tommy was actually shooting at another G-Nom called Arizona, who seems to have a scorpion tail and seems to run a criminal ring. That's a bit of an issue here that we have in this book and that you'll see throughout the book. We get a lot of apparentlys and maybes throughout it because we don't get clear definition of who those extra characters are. Before Arizona can get what is owned to her by poor little Tommy, Nyobi shows up and tries to arrest her, which leads to a quick fight, which Nyobi kinda succeeds at very well. And she knocks him into the Scorpion Lady and, well, knocks her into a cell at a facility of ARD, which is pretty efficient, if you ask me. I've seen Cyborg do that as well in a few comics using boom tubes. After that happened, Nyobi is called to her boss's office to discuss the event of the previous evening, and she gets a bit of a dressing down as things really didn't go as well as they could or should have. Nyobi does try to deflect a little bit by saying that Sybil was kind of murdering Cinder, which is understandable to bring up, but she was in charge of the whole operation, so she's the one that needs to be held accountable. The boss keeps going, and he talks about Keats' ability, saying that the guy cop unfortunately died really quickly after spewing a bunch of black goo, and the woman cop apparently released her supernatural powers and turned herself into pink ice. She's kept into custody somewhere else to make sure that she's not infectious or whatever. That brings up a bit of a potential issue. Nyobi and her boss decide that Keats is a major risk, and they decide to basically set up a sting at an upcoming G-Nom rally that was going to happen anyways the next day. The next day, we get Keats' full life story, and we basically learn just how brainwashed she actually is in thinking that she's oppressed and repressed, and that G-Noms are the most marginalized people in the world, which is not surprising. I'll bring it up here again. It's something that we haven't seen or haven't read in the books. We're just told that it is like that. At the G-Nom rally, we get another G-Nom called Nerium that basically makes a religious appeal for the rights of the G-Nom and really sounds like a G-Nom supremacist, which is not a great look if you ask me. And as this is going on, Nyobi shows up through a portal and gives her life story herself to try to explain how ARD is actually a pretty good organization. And what she's actually explaining makes a lot of sense, and people would probably easily understand that ARD is not a bad group of people. But still, as this is going on, Keith's friend Walker is walking around the crowd trying to find Keats, and he gets spotted by one of ARD's drone that starts tracking him in order to find Keats, which is the person they're trying to apprehend right now, as she is quite a risk. Unfortunately for everyone, Keats is not the smartest kettle in the set of kettles, and even with the police and ARD present, she decides that she must make a grandstanding act on stage against Nyobi. She is intercepted by Sybil, who tries to reason pretty poorly with her, as an ARD drone started to take down Keats, and it's Walker that actually gets tased. Keats decides to activate her powers, which start causing a lot of people in the park to start being sick. Well, it seems that women start getting superpowers, while men start spewing black goo and die. While this is all going on as well, Cinder shows up and starts attacking Sybil. Kind of a bit of a payback, I guess, for trying to choke her the day before. As I said, a bunch of women around the park starts erupting. We've got some Aqua Lady here. It looks a bit weird, but not terrible. I have no idea what this girl's power is, except that her eyes are glowing, but all G-Noms' eyes change color when their powers are active. Not quite sure there. Got this girl here who creates a force field around her. Not quite sure how it works, but it seems to be quite efficient at stopping that car. And as this is going on, Cinder starts spotting more reason why people should probably fear the G-Noms, while the blue lady comes out of the city fountain to fight Nyobi. I think we saw that lady in Nyobi Origins, but I still don't know her name and I don't know anything about her, which goes back to what we were discussing earlier about us not knowing half of the people we have in there, and the other half we don't know enough about. So there are some flaws here in this book that are problematic. The problem is not the thematics. The thematics here, they work. The problem is not the dialogue, which works perfectly fine. It's actually pretty good in general. It's not the characters. Most of them are interesting and are very good looking, which is a great way to keep your reader entertained. The problem is that we really don't know what's going on. We are told that the G-Noms are being marginalized, but we don't see it anywhere. We don't even have a standard intro page where you would have news media saying like 50 G-Noms were arrested today in Budapest, and a riot erupted in Romania and led to the death of 3 G-Nom. Something along those lines to make us have an idea of like, yes, there are problems right now with the G-Nom population. Right now, we're just told that. And most of the G-Noms we see, because we do see quite a few in this issue outside of our main characters, just look like average Janes, basically. So nothing unusual about them. Most of them would probably go to an ARD facility. ARD would look at them and say like, yeah, you've got 3 eyes and you're blue. What can your third eye see? Well, I see normally through it. Okay, well, you've got 3 eyes. Congratulations. You'll probably have some people look at you funny, but based on basic laws in North America and in most Western countries, you're good to go. People like Vira, of course, if your ability is to cause people to die, you'd probably get arrested, and you'd probably get some trouble if you cause people to die. That's not unusual. As I said here, the issues are not thematics. The issues is not the dialogue, the characters. The issue is what goes around it. We have Catcall and Sybil that we basically know nothing about, except they're there, basically. I'm not even sure if Catcall is called by her name throughout this issue. I'd have to look it back, and it's not clear anywhere. The villains either are not well identified, and they're not well described. All of this causes issues to the reader and causes issue in text, which is where this particular issue has issues. Could go into a deeper dive than this. Honestly, I might do something like that, maybe on a live stream at some point, but not here in this review. We're now going to look at the main cover for this book. This is the one I have personally, and it's a pretty fun cover overall. It does show our main characters apparently fighting a mob, which is not quite what happens in the book, but is an interesting concept. It's done by the interior artist, which is always a plus. I really think that's the proper way to do it. At least your primary cover should always be done by your interior artist, so people have an idea of what's going on. Really nice to have the focus be on those two main characters in action poses. Much better than those pinup covers that we've had in a way, just because action poses are more intriguing to a lot of readers and a lot of people who would grab the book off the rack. Some people might find this a little bit too tame compared to other covers, but personally I find it perfectly fine and not too fan servicey at the same time. It fits that particular location really well. The paper copy of this book that I have is really great, top tier quality for a regular floppy. Having heard that DC is going to make the quality of their paper in their books cheaper in the coming year actually confuses me, when in the generally they go 2 to 3 step higher than what DC was doing now. Apparently Marvel books paper quality is lower, but I haven't given money to Marvel in the longest time outside of an Hachette collection, but that's giving money to Hachette and not Marvel. Never mind. And those books are really, really good quality. Hard covers as well. So I'm happy with the quality we get out of this book. It works perfectly fine and is what I expect, let's say, most indie comics to be. Some of them might just go to step up, and some of them are even talking about art covers recently, but that's a whole different price point. We get a few ads at the end of the book, at the very end. The first one that I see in the digital copy that I'm using to take my images for the review was for Sinopa Publishing. There's 4 of those books here. We saw Tibi in the previous Nyobi Outbreak. The one that interests me here is 47 Furious Tales. I just find the concept looks funny. I'd have to see it, obviously, but it's something that actually interests me in those 4 books. Get another ad. Well, it's the same ad for Peter Vasquez. Here, another one that really works, and depending on who you are buying this comic, it might be an helpful thing to have at least a reference of someone working in or around the industry. We get an ad for Atrocity Press's Love and Madness, which might be interesting. I'll really have to wait until the campaign comes out so I can look at it. Atrocity Press is a little bit harder towards the mature portion of the readership, so it's not a thing that I hunt for generally, but it might be something that's interesting. I will see when campaign drops. The final ad is for Niobe Penguina. The Kickstarter ended for this a little while back. The Indiegogo campaign was basically canceled. Basically done funding. You'll probably be able to buy it off eBay for after a little while, and it'll probably hit the stores a little while later, which is one of the big advantages of the Niobe comics, as they will be released in stores through Antarctic Press. Let's go through the arts in this, and I would say the art style here is really fitting for what we have in the book, and everything looks how it should, basically. And actually, I see a bit of an improvement book over book, which would be normal, but here a lot of things are rather interesting. The first character we meet outside of Tommy, who's, well, I won't even say that Tommy's a faceless mook, because he does have a personality through the art we see of him. But the first important one, let's face it, is Arizona, which is a fun character design. Yes, the scorpion tail, reminiscent of our good friend the Scorpion, which is one of those B-list villain from Spider-Man, but her costume is fairly good, and we can tell that the artist here puts the extra effort to keep those costumes interesting. The belly button piercing here, the little gold ring in the bra, the pattern on the shirt. All of that adds depth to the character and makes her more interesting and more appealing. Of course, if I were to go around racketeering people, even though I have a scorpion tail, I'd probably, wear some body armor or something like that, especially if I know the guy's got a gun. Well, Tommy's an awful shot, so never mind. We are seeing a current conservative uproar about a woman cooking a cake and a swimmer in a swimming suit. So maybe that shower scene would be a little bit too steamy for some, but overall it's a pretty basic scene, about at the same level as what we saw in Mary Machine Gun earlier from Atrocity Press. So nothing that would harm most normal people's sensibilities. It's very nice that we see a lot of nameless characters in this, and all of them do seem to have their own individuality, and they're not just people added to a scene. You do see that the three-eyed blued woman that I was talking about earlier here, we see all sorts of G-Noms here, and they're all different enough and all interesting enough that they're fun to look at and they're fun to imagine who they are. We see those kids playing as well, which is really an interesting take and fun to see. And that's what is reflected through motives of this book. Nobody's really a faceless grunt. Everything has its own presence, and that's something that's really interesting. Nyobi's costume in this issue is a little bit more sensible. No short skirt. Here we've got a full bodysuit, more or less. I'd probably wear something to protect my abdomen if I was going to fight crime or fight super-powered villains. But it's comic books. We have to accept what we see. And Nerium looks really cool for the short time we actually see her. Her face does warp from one panel to another. I'm not quite sure if she's supposed to be really young-looking and feminine, or in this last panel here where she looks a little bit older and a little bit less feminine, let's say. Here it might just be, the artist learning how to draw the character. We've seen that a few times. And it mightn't just be here that we don't have a whole lot of direction overall for this character, especially since we don't see her for very long. The various other women who are erupting throughout the park actually look really cool as well. I really like the fish lady. It actually looks different enough as a merlady or a mermaid, something along those lines. Once again, we get a little bit more depth with those scales showing on her skin. You see it very little here, but here we see it really well. And that does give a lot of depth to the character and the art, which is something we are missing in some other comics every once in a while. We get a few cars and a few trucks in this as well. Most of the designs are fairly functional. They're better than what we had seen in Nyobi Origins, as an example. But you really have to be careful when you're dealing with car crashes or cars hitting things in general. Here we're supposed to have a force field. The car hitting it goes up from the forward back. Unless it's something that's pushing it up, it doesn't make sense here. From what we see in the angle we see here, the car should be hitting it, the back going up, and the front crumpling. This is usual stuff. I've been bringing that up. 4 car crashes every time I see one. I'm not sure why this triggers me so much. The ARD drones are all pretty good. They're very basic design, but that's what we expect drones to be. Nowadays, you could have gone a little bit harder on it. Haha, it's a joke. But I don't think it was really necessary. This is functional for what is needed. I do enjoy that G-Nom Rights poster with the We Will Resist. It's very simple, but it's G-Nom, We Will Resist. Everything in that particular composition looks really well and would probably be sold in all sorts of Hot Topics and other stores across America, just because of how marketable this form of anarchy generally is for businesses. Panel work here is also really good, and it keeps you interested, and it doesn't deter from the reading. There's nothing hyper fancy in there, but I think that's a plus in many books. Some people try too hard with weird paneling and weird layouts, sometimes going with something fairly simple, like this here. It's basically there would be a 6-panel page, but you merge it a little differently, and it becomes more interesting. A minor gripe as we start talking about story and textual elements here. I understand why they're swearing in this book. I mean, it's not unusual in the end, but it does raise the mark from this book from probably something 9, 10 plus to probably a 13 plus or a R13 plus. Mangas generally manage to skirt that line, even with risque art and things like that, just because they manage to evade these kinds of little traps that get into the language way. Of course, unless you're talking about things being translated by the current localizer trend, you know what I mean. I think it's a good thing to emulate for most comic artists, unless you're going for the art R, like Atrocity Press, like we saw in Mary Machine Gun and a few of the other things he put out. There's no reason to go for that 13 plus audience. Better to keep it to a larger potential audience. I do hope Arizona gets a trial. I mean, you might be a super powered person committing crimes, but basic law should still apply to you. We do see that in Alpha Core. It was actually pretty fun when we got a superhero cop reading the Miranda rights to a criminal. While she does look cool, I find it really, really hard to care about Miriam. Once you start reading what she's spouting, she just sounds like a G-Nom supremacist and not someone who's trying to fight for the rights of the G-Noms or anybody like that. It's simply, we're superior, we're the best, and we should supplant you, which is not a great way to make friends in the long run, especially if you are apparently an oppressed minority. Vera/Kate's inner monologue as she wakes up is probably meant to make us empathize with her a bit, and it would probably work with bleeding art liberals. But for most people anywhere right of Marx at this point in town, she's going to sound like a complete delusional fanatic, which is more dangerous than righteous. It's an issue that a lot of creators would have creating this kind of character, because the reality we see now versus the reality that we have in the comics and what we have in a lot of places starts not matching what reality actually gives us. And this is a really big problem with these types of movements. One thing I've figured out here is that only women can actually erupt as G-Noms. I've heard Larry Higgins talk about it on various streams, but this is a thing that's never explained in any books, and it's not a thing that makes sense on a genetic level. Maybe it's a spiritual thing and not a genetic thing, but if it's a spiritual thing and every woman can erupt, men would have something similar or something different that could occur to them in a spiritual sense. That's where things get a little complicated. I understand that the idea is to have, a bunch of hot chicks that you can put on the paper, but there's also a point where, as a reader, I do like seeing cool and badass looking dudes doing cool and badass looking things. That's literally what is getting me interested in the Duke series from the new G.I. Joe reboot. Again, a thing that I keep bringing up here, we see no violence, no repression, no oppression of the G-Noms in all the Nyobi books that we've seen. All the G-Noms that are acting like complete jerks basically make it like, yeah, we should control the G-Nom population because, well, they're going around causing mass viral outbreaks. There's another one that goes around burning people. Those are not good things and would lead probably to things a little bit more than just repression and oppression. It would lead to outright extermination, which is probably not what we'd want to see in a book either. So there are things that need to be discussed that are not in the text, and that's a big issue if we want to be able to follow that story and follow the themes that we have in the story. In the other book series from this Birthright, we also have another problem that I've just thought of as I was going through creating this review. The Catholic Church has G-Noms on speed dials. Yes, they look like angels. It kind of makes sense. But that would basically mean that 1.3 billion people in the world are pretty much okay with G-Noms as long as they're Catholics and that they're following Catholic Church. This also goes against part of the text that we add where the G-Noms are supposed to be a marginalized group. If 1.3 billion people don't think they're marginalized, this makes things a little bit more difficult, let's say. we are missing a lot of context through this. Things that we can piece together, having read all the books, do help. But a lot of it comes from me actually having watched stream, having looked at different reviews, different things, learning about the characters outside of it. I've already discussed this with the creator. There's different things going on. I understand how it's going, but there probably needs to be more of a block of knowledge on these characters that is readily available for people to be able to jump into it. If we look at the book itself, however, it's really well done. We've got a good hooking action scene at the start. We've got the necessary exposition and character development afterwards, which are actually really good. It moves in the right direction at a proper pace. It's never too slow. It's never too fast. We don't get massive exposition dumps. We get nice, concise exposition tidbits, which are easy to digest and easy to make us understand, like, where are we going next? In the end, this would have been probably better as part 2 of a graphic novel rather than part 2 of a floppy series. I understand the financing aspect of things and such, but unless you're really releasing those books monthly or even every 3 months, let's say, this format doesn't quite work for the regular reader. It will work for people following your Kickstarter, things like that, but it doesn't work in the long run. Even if you're in store, if your book is in store once every 6 months, people will not be drawn to it as much as something that comes out regularly on a fixed schedule. The good news, though, is that this book does keep your attention throughout, and it keeps you entertained. So you do want to know what's going to happen next, what's going to happen to the characters, what's the interactions between them. This is actually better than some of the other indie floppies that I have read in the past year, where I have a hard time caring about some of the characters, or they try to put everything down in a single line and we lose interest. I understand that Larry Higgins is a polarizing figure and he's very outspoken, and that's kind of why I like him. Not everybody would like his point of view. Not everybody likes how he interacts with some people. But I think the fact that he's actually honest and actually brings up what he wants to bring up is very important and something that is missing in the indie sphere. Not the drama part, but the part about actually saying what you think and sticking to those guns rather than following the flow of whichever personality you decide to align yourself with. As a writer, if you go through the different books that he's done, including this one here, you'll see that he is pretty good at his job and that he brings interesting character developments, interesting interactions, and good dialogue. So these are the kind of books that I would recommend, and those are easy to get nowadays since most of those will be available in your regular stores at different points in time. Or you can get them, like I said, through eBay as well. Maybe having an actual storefront would be better. I'm not 100% sure what's the best solutions in these. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Keep on reading comics. Keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.